Hello. So I'm Richard Hurowitz, and I'm the author of a book called In the Garden of the Righteous, which tells stories of people who rescued Jews and others during the Holocaust, which are some of the most heroic stories, I think, in human history. And it's something I've been studying for about 10 years. And today, what I wanted to do was tell you one of the stories. I'm often asked, who is the person in the book that is my favorite, and I usually dodge the question, but today I'm going to tell you who it is, and it's a Italian cyclist named Gino Bartali, and his story is remarkable, and I hope that today gives you a little bit of hope, actually, in light of everything that is going on. So Gino Bartali, and I tried to get a picture of him here, was actually in his time. He was a cyclist, and he won the Tour de France in 1938. He was the most famous athlete in Italy. He was probably the most famous athlete in Europe. He was from Florence. Grew up extremely poor, and the way it worked was, he was from a little village outside of Florence, and the business of the village was doing the laundry for the city. And the women would do the laundry, and the men would ride bicycles and deliver it. And when Gino got to be into the sixth grade, he had to go into Florence, and his father got him a bicycle. And he learned that he was incredible at what was then a new sport. So he had this sort of meteoric rise, and in 1938 won the Tour de France. Now, to take a step back, Mussolini, who was the dictator at that time of Italy, was obsessed with sports. He wanted to. He said he wanted to turn Italy from a nation of mandolin players into a nation of warriors. So he often showed himself as an athlete, and Italy was having a lot of success. So they did quite well in the Olympic Games. They won the World Cup. Primo Carnera was the heavyweight champion of the world. Every single athlete dedicated their victory to the fascist regime and to Mussolini. But when Gino Bartali won the 1938 Tour de France, he didn't do this. He actually went, and it ended in Paris, and he dedicated it to the Virgin Mary because he was an extraordinarily devout Catholic. And he was so famous, there was really nothing that at that point they could do to him. But he became sort of persona non grata with the regime. They refused to cover his victory. So this was the background of Gino. And then the war happened. And in the beginning of the war, he was drafted and was allowed to actually, he was put as a motorcycle messenger, but he was allowed to actually use his bicycle to stay in training. So I'm not sure how much people know about the Italy and the Jews, but the Italians had discriminatory laws pretty late, actually, but they did not believe in murdering the Jews. So anywhere in occupied Europe where the Italians were occupying, Jews generally survived. They called the sort of virulent anti-Semitism the German disease. So while Jews were discriminated against in Italy, it wasn't until 1943 that things became really dire. And so in 1943, ironically, we, the Allies, invaded Italy, and we came all the way up to right south of Rome. And Mussolini temporarily fell, and then the Germans came in and occupied the north of Italy and put Mussolini back on. And so if you were in the south of Italy as a Jew, you were free. But if you were in the north, this is when things became very dire, and this is when you really had the Holocaust arrive in Italy. So Bartali at this time joined something called the Assisi Underground. And the Assisi Underground was actually a network of mostly church sites centered on Assisi, where the Catholic Church in the north, quite heroically actually, tried to save a lot of Jews. And they did this by hiding them in monasteries and convents and even in the cloisters. And in Assisi, where there probably had never been anybody Jewish ever, it's a religious center, they were hiding many Jews and also partisans. And so Bartali's priest, because again he was so famous, was actually the the Cardinal of Florence, Cardinal della Costa, who himself has been recognized as righteous among the nations. And he recruited Bartali into the underground, and Bartali did a number of things. So first of all, one thing he did, which is sort of unrelated to his cycling, is he actually hid a family of four in a basement of an apartment that he owned in Florence. And he also rescued another Jewish person and a Romani that he hid. This was extremely dangerous. So for about the entire duration of the occupation, he had Jews living in his apartment. Interestingly, he joined and he served as a courier in the underground. And what he would, at the time, Dorothy Thompson, the journalist, said, "We live in a time when pieces of paper are the difference between life and death." So if you needed a visa or you needed a passport. So the part of the underground was creating counterfeit papers and counterfeit visas. Bartali would hide these. So if you think about it, Gino Bartali was the only person in Italy who had an excuse to be out riding his bicycle in plain sight. He was also one of the only person probably who could ride hundreds of miles a day between Florence and Genova and Assisi and Rome, which he did. And inside of his bicycle, he hid papers to help Jews escape to the south. And this would have been a capital crime if he was captured. And so there are these stories of he was bicycling all over, leaving papers. There was a counterfeiter who actually was so scared of what he was doing, he was about to leave the underground, and then he saw Bartali's involvement, and he said, if Gino Bartali, this famous athlete, is involved, how could I not be? So he was quite inspirational as an underground figure. And by doing this, he saved about 700 people. They would stop him at a checkpoint, and the papers would be under his handlebars, and the police would come over, and he would say, "Don't touch my bike. It's perfectly calibrated for racing." And so people, because he was so famous, they would just let him go by. I mean, there was another great story of there was a train station, and when they were moving Jews from one train to another was very dangerous because the Nazis were patrolling the platform. He showed up at the train station. This would be like if LeBron James walked into this room and all of a sudden, he was getting mobbed and people were surrounding him and they wanted autographs, and even the police started looking at him, and in the background, literally the partisans were moving them from one station to another. So he did amazing things like this. Towards the end of the war, he was actually arrested, and he was almost tortured, and he was only rescued because one of the people who was among the police had been his commanding officer, the guy who had actually given him permission to ride his bicycle as opposed to a motor scooter. So towards the end of the war, he also saved a number of British soldiers, but he was a real hero. And then never told anybody what he did. After the war, he really wanted to be known as a sportsman. 1948, he really had a lot of his career actually stolen from him by the war, and in 1948 he went back and became one of the oldest people to ever win the Tour de France. It's legendary in Italy because his rival was another cyclist named Fausto Coppi. They still talk about this rivalry today. It's like Ali Frazier, Red Sox, Yankees, and during the Tour de France, Italy actually almost came apart. There was a huge, almost civil war between the communists and the Christian Democrats, and the Communist Party leader was almost assassinated. And the Bartali victory actually brought the entire country of Italy together. When the news was brought to the parliament, they all stood up and applauded. And so they used to say Gino Bartali saved the country, and he had a sense of humor. So he said, "I don't think I saved the country, but I gave it a smile back." In any event, rumors came out about what he had done during the war, and he never wanted to tell anybody. He had this view that if you do something nice for someone else, you don't talk about it. It takes away from it, and you're also profiting from someone else's misery, which is pretty remarkable. I mean, the man was so famous. He became, after he retired, sort of a color commentator. He was the spokesperson for Coca-Cola. He had a platform if he wanted to take credit for this, and there were rumors out there. So but he refused to do so, and he would tell. He told his son the story, and his son said, "Why are you telling me this if I can't tell anyone?" He said, one day you'll know what to do." And I've seen video of his 80th birthday party where they ask him about some of this, and he waves them off. He said, I don't want to talk about it. This is very unusual, but having read testimony from hundreds of rescuers, this is very common. This is what they say. "I just did what anyone else would do. I did the decent thing," which is why these people are so heroic. And I have sort of a mission that I think we all need to have, is to why do we all know the names of Heinrich Himmler and Hermann Goering, but we don't know the story about someone like Gino Bartali. So years later, the story came out actually after he died. A little boy who was one of the people who was hiding in his basement came out with the story. probably about 10 years ago, and since then it's become very well known, obviously in Italy and in Israel, and he was honored at Yad Vashem, and actually there's the second greatest bicycle race after the Tour de France is the Giro d'Italia. Bartali is one of the few people who won it in 1 year, which is it's like a month apart and is it's an enormous feat of endurance. So he was made an honorary citizen of Israel, and actually the first time that the Giro d'Italia, the beginning of it, was ever held outside the continent of Europe was 12 years ago when it was held in Israel. The first 3 stages were in Israel as a show of thanks and gratitude and honor to Bartali. Israel, from its founding, Yad Vashem has had actually as part of its mission to honor the righteous. And my book is called In the Garden of the Righteous, which is the place at Yad Vashem where they plant a tree for every righteous person. And at the ceremony where they inaugurated it, Golda Meir said that these people, the righteous, are like a drop of a drop of love in an ocean of poison, and that the Jewish people will forever and always be grateful to them for what they did. Hannah Shanesh, who was a poet and a paratrooper and an early sort of proto-Israeli, wrote a poem about the righteous, and she said that they were like the stars, where they are extinguished, but we get their light, and they continue to shine, and they light the way for all mankind. And to me, that is what Gino Bartali did. He had a wonderful, wonderful quote where he said that why he did this to his son. And he said, in life, he really wanted to be known as a cyclist. And he said, there's some medals you get, and there's some trophies you get, and they go into your trophy case. He said, there are other medals you get, and you get them in the next life, and they're pinned to your soul. So I hope you remember the story of Gino Bartali, and I hope it gives you some inspiration in these very difficult times. So thank you very much.